Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the December Stories on Stage Davis. We're halfway through the 10th season. We couldn't do it without you. Welcome to our December event. Let's give ourselves a round of applause like we like to do at the holidays for being here tonight. We have a terrific show in store for you this evening. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that Stories on Stage Davis is supported by a 2022 City of Davis Arts Grant, which is funded by the Sacramento Region Community Foundation, a California nonprofit corporation. We're really grateful for that support. That's the sort of support that enables us to sustain events like this one. We'd like to remind you to silence your cell phones so that they don't distract us. It's so embarrassing when you're the one whose phone makes a bunch of noise, right at the pivotal part of a story. You don't want that to be you, so I'm glad I'm warning you now. We'll have a book signing after the event, and you'll have an opportunity during the intermission to purchase some books. Books make great gifts. They can be opened again and again. So we hope that you'll take advantage of that. A few other announcements. Stories on Stage Davis is in search of volunteers. This is a volunteer-run organization, and we'd love to have some more people help us run it. So if you're interested, make sure to talk to one of the volunteers. You can also email us through the website. How this will work tonight is that I will introduce our first author, and then I'll introduce our first actor, upon which time the author will come up and say something about the story that we will enjoy first, and then the actor immediately thereupon. Then we'll enjoy an intermission. You'll be encouraged to purchase some food and drink. When I say purchase, I mean, of course, make a donation to Stories on Stage for things like pumpkin spice bread and double chocolate cupcakes with caramel butter, powdered sugar frosting. I'm going to check during the break to see if those are non-fat. Yeah. Okay, and so let's get right to our author and our actor. Our first author of the evening is Bruce Rettig. He spent 4 years of his early 20s working as a merchant marine in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, one of the most remote destinations in the world and home to the largest oil field in North America. Refraction An Arctic Memoir recounts the power of big oil, dangers of working in an industrial environment, the shadow of the Cold War of the 1980s, and growing threats posed by climate change. Refraction is the story of one person's journey told in a series of reflections on a time spent living in a frozen wasteland. I'm glad we'll get to enjoy one of those reflections tonight. Brought to us by Eric Baldwin. Eric Baldwin has performed all over the United States and Europe in roles as diverse as Henry V, Macbeth, Biff in Death of a Salesman, Prospero, Shylock, Pale in Burn This, and Barry Champlin in Talk Radio. He was artistic director of the Quantum Theater Company in Los Angeles and the founder of Resurrection Theater in Sacramento. A perfect title for a theater company at Christmas time, I think. All right, let's please bring up our first author of the evening, Bruce Rettig. Bruce?
Hi, thank you, and good evening, everyone. First off, I just wanted to thank Stories on Stage for presenting tonight's event and all the actors who read these literary works on stage, including Eric Baldwin, who I met when we first got here, and I think he's going to do a great job. He'll be reading my story tonight, of course, on Stories on Stage, and it's such a unique program. I'm very grateful for being a part of it, and I appreciate everyone attending tonight, including family and friends. Thank you. In 2010, I wrote a flash nonfiction piece titled Kaktovic. Flash fiction pieces are short, very short stories, usually about 500 to 1,000 words maximum. I think of these pieces as standalone snapshots that often tell a larger story. My story described a precarious flight to an Alaskan Inupiat village, and was published in an anthology called Cold Flashes, Literary Snapshots of Alaska. It was funded by the University of Alaska Press. 6 years later, I revisited that piece, and my 433-word story eventually evolved into 333-page memoir based on the years I worked in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska in my early 20s. When I first started, I thought it'd be a collection of stories, and then I found that it was an arc that was formed over the course of those 4 years. I was a lot different person from where I went in and where I came out 4 years later. Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope is located almost 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle and is home to the largest oil field in North America, as was mentioned earlier. My book, Refraction An Arctic Memoir, recounts my experience of working in this remote area as a laborer and merchant marine, and some readers have commented that my book is actually 3 stories or themes: the story of my personal experience in the Arctic, the story of life outside the Arctic over the passage of time, and the story of human impact on the environment. Described in the Community of Writers Workshop as a cross between Heart of Darkness and Into the Wild, it's won several writing contests along with many gold awards in nonfiction and adventure. But the one accolade that I'm most proud of is a silver award in the category of ecology and environment. People sometimes ask me about the title Refraction and why I chose it, and the dictionary definition is at the beginning of the book, and the third line resonates the strongest to me. And it is the action of distorting an image by viewing through a medium. A refracted image is basically a mirage, a trick to the eye. Sometimes looking out at sea, working up in Prudhoe, a distant boat or ship might appear to be hovering in the horizon, or the mountains of the Brook Range, which is about 100 miles to the south of Prudhoe Bay, would appear as a distorted floating island. They're also known in Italian as Fata Morgana, and it was believed that these mirages were castles in the air or false land created by witchcraft to lure sailors to their death. I use this mirage-like phenomena as a metaphorical context, distortions of what one might believe as compared to what one might discover to be closer to the truth. Sections of my book are from the view of 20-year-old eyes, and then other sections are from, I want to say 40 years later, almost a little bit more than that. It was a time of learning in the 20-year-old eyes and when I was trying to find my way in the world. The passages that will be read tonight focus on working and living in this remote, isolated environment, and we each navigate our own youthful rite of passage. And this is the story of my journey, and told in a series of reflections on a time spent living in a frozen, remote work camp near the top of the world. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the reading.
Refraction by Bruce Rettig. I worked in the Prudhoe Bay oil fields of Alaska for the money. That's what I tell people when asked why I once traveled north year after year. A spring migration to one of the most remote places on Earth. The answer is not entirely true. Yes, paychecks were larger than what a college student would ever dream of making during a summer break. The hourly pay and union-inflated overtime wages were a motivating factor. But something else pulled at me each year, tugging me to a place so far from friends and family. Maybe the motivation originated in a sense of adventure, or camaraderie with fellow laborers, or an opportunity to prove to myself that I had the toughness and stamina to work a minimum of 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in not so ideal conditions. Or, possibly, the main reason relied on a yearning for something. Anything that might help me better understand my life and what direction it might take, and provide a greater understanding of the world. Maybe I simply longed for escape. For better or worse, I've always been a bit of a loner and tended to buck the status quo, so heading out by myself to some unknown place and situation would make perfect sense. When I journeyed to the camp each year, I carried no more than a duffel bag stuffed with foul weather gear and a few items to get me through the season. Like most people in their 20s, I had a lot of questions, and the more I traveled and explored, the longer the list grew. I also bore with me the weight of prior mistakes and bad decisions, which often haunted my judgment and reasoning. The few things I thought I knew or might have believed were put to the test during my ventures north. The Arctic Marine Freighters Camp was located at the end of a 2.5-mile gravel road called a causeway and stretched onto Prudhoe Bay like a large finger pointing north. Where the causeway began and the land ended was a little over 15 miles from Deadhorse. My home for the next several months resided as far north as you could travel by land, and another 2.5 miles into an Arctic bay. Frozen seawater surrounded the sides of the road, fractured ice uplifting onto the gravel embankments. "Welcome home," Joel Burkhalter, my ride from the airport, said when he reached the end of the causeway and we pulled up to the AMF camp. The camp resembled a scrapyard, partially covered with snow and ice. No other location we passed looked as rough as this one. I realized some structures were barges, and on top of them rested a myriad of equipment, storage vans and containers like unrecognizable carcasses strewn across metal slabs. Jutting upward from the barges, farther down the road, were radio antennas, insect-like against the dull gray sky. The camp floated, or more accurately, remained trapped in ice at the tip of the causeway. Great. If there is an official end of the line, both physically and metaphorically, this is it. I climbed out of the truck and grabbed my duffel bag from the back. 2 small barges caught my eye. They floated into an area that had begun to thaw, creating a mini lagoon. Each barge had a row of large white hoses and a small blue shack on their deck. On the side, stenciled white lettering designated "Suck 'em Up Number 1 and Suck 'em Up Number 2. Joe noticed me studying the shacks. "Another one of Bear's experiments." The Bear? "Bill Payne, our boss." They certainly are hung up with bears. A stuffed one at the airport behind glass, one used in the AMF company logo. Even the boss was named after the large mammal. Must be an icon of the North. We made our way up a gangplank to one of the small barges, walked across the deck, and then up another gangplank to a larger barge. Our footsteps emanated a hollow echo across the metal-framed walkway. I still did not understand how anyone could sleep in the monstrosity of the outbuildings and equipment. The drone of the generator filled the air, as did the smell of diesel, running metal, and frozen seawater. "Your room's up this catwalk, second story." A stairway angled alongside what looked like trailers from a trailer park, stacked 2 high, 3 rows deep. From the number of doors, it looked like each one had 3 living quarters. At the very top corner of the conglomeration of boxes rested 1 unit and a slightly higher, smaller unit with windows on the side, allowing a full view of the camp and Prudhoe Bay. "You're in number 2 with Townsend and Ronnie. We'll have some work for you in the morning." I opened the door and I walked into my quarters. The area, approximately 20 feet long by 15 feet wide, reminded me of the spare room in my grandmother's mobile home, where I used to visit as a kid. 2 bunk beds ran lengthwise along the side of the walls, and a table with an ashtray stuffed with cigarette butts resided by the one and only window. A row of 4 closets spanned the shorter wall. 4 workers in 1 room? No way. A growing pool of water meandered across the floor. Drops splattered down the roof, feeding the flow toward my feet. I had descended into trailer trash status. I turned the knob on the heater, lifeless. I took another look around the room. Cheap paneled walls, well-worn scuffed linoleum, and no carpeting or rugs, and 1 non-functional wall heater, all to be shared by 4 coworkers after a 12-hour workday. Outside the window was a field of ice that stretched 1,300 miles to the top of the world, the North Pole. The room served as a personal torture chamber in this frozen hell. Serious doubts about spending one more minute there seeped into my head. How difficult would it be to find Joel Burkhalter and have a talk with him? The sound of footsteps on the metal grate catwalk signaled approaching workers. The door swung open and hit the inside wall with a bang as two men walked in. One had longish dark hair and a matching beard. The other was tall, well over 6 feet, with blonde red hair and a half-grown beard. Both wore the same kind of Carholt coveralls that were stuffed in my duffel bag, only theirs were dirty and worn. "Hey," the man with the dark beard said. "Hi, I'm Bruce. We heard we were getting another roommate. I'm Ken Townsend, the guy, tall guy. That's Ronnie. How's it going?" Ronnie reached out and we shook hands. The small stream falling to the floor caught his eye. What the heck? Damn. Ken took a towel out of one of the closets and threw it on top of the water. Everything in camp is thawing out. Someone will have to take a look at the roof. I noticed our heater died this morning too. I stood before them and I looked down at my duffel bag. 2 top bunks are empty, take your choice, Ken said. Locker down at the end is empty, you can throw your gear in there. He tapped the ashtray with his finger. "And I'll smoke outside." "No problem. I used to bartend at night. I'm used to cigarette smoke." I looked around. "Where's the men's room?" "There is no men's room," Ronnie said and smiled at Ken. The heads down below under the catwalk. Ken slid open the window. He lit a cigarette, took a deep inhale, and flicked the match into the ashtray. It's a cold walk there and back, so a lot of guys keep piss cans in their lockers. "That's disgusting," Ronnie said, squinting his eyes. Thoughts of finding Joel Burkhalter and catching the first rat out of camp began to fade. Maybe I had only been exhausted by the long trip. I could possibly ride it out for a few days and see what work awaited me. I unpacked my duffel bag and stowed my gear in the locker and set the book I'd been reading on top of one of the bunks. "Ken's an engineer," Ronnie said. "A company man. I'm a grunt." "Oh, I guess I'm a grunt too." "Who's your contract?" Contact. Contact? "Yeah, you're a PA. Who's your sponsor?" "PA, yeah, political appointee," Ken smiled. "What's your last name?" "Rettig." "Oh, one of the big guys." Ken set the cigarette into the ashtray. He leaned over and took off his boots. "If you're not a full-time employee, you have to know someone to work up here." Now that made sense, especially after completing all my paperwork at the union office. To gain membership into the Maritime Union, you had to have a job lined up. And applying for a job in the maritime trade required possession of a union card. I had wondered how one managed to negotiate that catch-22. "Come on, I'll show you where the head is." Ronnie opened the door and stepped out onto the catwalk. We walked to the bottom of the stairs, and he pointed to one of the doors in the lower unit. "That's the head. Sea showers only, limited to every other day." Then he pointed his thumb over his shoulder. "And that's the galley. Angelo's the cook, and he serves breakfast from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. Work starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 6 p.m. Dinner just ended, but you can probably get a sandwich." The head was about 2/3 the length of one unit. 4 stalls, 5 sinks, and 2 showers. I assumed that when the camp filled up, you had to schedule your shower based on non-peak times. Everything was basic, but somewhat clean. And the hum of the camp's large generator continued to reverberate throughout the camp, like the thumping of a heartbeat. I walked out of the bathroom, and the smell of charbroiled steak still hung in the air between the modules. In the morning, I would be the new guy, walking into the galley, a greenhorn without a clue. They'd probably wonder how long I'd last. I thought I had done my fair share of snow shoveling, having lived in Colorado. I soon achieved a higher education in the fine art of snow removal as our crew worked to uncover every barge, tugboat, forklift, and any other piece of equipment covered by winter snowdrift. The AMF camp had filled with workers, an odd mixture of company employees and college students like myself. The latter tried to make good money before heading back to school. Even a full-time teacher worked the camp during his summer break. Others were laborers, drifted, one project to the next. Like Lee, who worked this summer so he could take off large spans of time during the fall and winter to hunt. Everyone had their connection with either Crowley Maritime or one of the oil companies, the only way to hold a job at AMF if you weren't a company man. The company workers were professionals, engineers like Ken, electricians, welders, and crane operators. "Time for a muck break," one of my coworkers, Jeff Selengis, said before he took out a tin of chewing tobacco. "I don't know why you guys chew that shit," Lee said. "Helps us get through the day," Jeff said. Mike Tompkins and Jeff Selengis were friends and attended Washington State University in Pullman. They, along with Lee and I, had been assigned to dig out a large amount of snow between the units and open up a walkway. It's days spent in a world of snow and frozen metal. "It's not like the work is grueling," Mike said. "It's more the psychological mindfuck of putting in long, monotonous hours and not going crazy by doing the same thing exactly, day after day. All I've written on my time card for the last 3 weeks is shovel snow," I said. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Dark Varney sunglasses shielded my eyes from the flat glare of frozen sea, a tabletop of ice stretching south to the mainland, holding our camp captive. After a morning snowstorm swept by, a gray sky held the temperature to the low 30s. I was told that the Inupiat had over 100 names for ice. I found that difficult to accept until gazing out at the ever-evolving sheets of frozen water as days drifted into weeks. This frozen world dictated our work schedule. The initial goals, uncovering all the boats, barges, and equipment so they would be free of ice. Shovel, axe, and sledgehammer helped accomplish this task. By the second day, we had cleared enough of the decks to make it possible to pop all the hatches on the barges. Once opened, they could air out and be safe for the Coast Guard inspectors to enter the hulls. I watched Steve Marikovich, a college student like me, as he negotiated his way up another arching snowdrift that made a convenient path to the bow of barge 218. He carried a couple of buckets, 2 flat-nosed shovels, and a coil of line. He jumped across a narrow gap between the ice and barge and onto the deck. "Boss wants us to muck out the barges." He dropped everything, pulled out a tin of Copenhagen, and stuck a wad of tobacco behind his lip. The crew had developed their own jargon, and muck meant several things depending on the usage. Regarding a tugboat or barge, muck it out meant to clean the bottom of a hull. Muck it up, on the other hand, meant to cram as much chewing tobacco as possible behind your lower lip. The single usage, a muck, was the actual chewing tobacco wad, as in, let's have a muck. Mucking out a barge involved entering the interior of the vessel with a couple of 10-gallon plastic buckets and shovels. It wasn't my favorite task, and climbing down the steel ladder into the bowels of a barge always reminded me of what it must feel like to enter catacombs deep within the earth. It was one of the few places in camp where I felt uneasy. Walking into a pocket devoid of air seemed like an unsettling way to meet one's demise. A common chemical reaction that takes place within the cavernous interior of a barge. Iron, water, and oxygen creates hydrated iron oxide, better known as rust. When metal rusts, it eats up oxygen. In a confined or closed space, like the interior of a sealed barge, areas void of air often form. The worst thing about entering a dead spot is the fact that you would never know you had entered it. Much like carbon monoxide poisoning, victims never realize they've succumbed to the danger until it's too late. Don't the Coast Guard guys need to check it out first? I peered into the manhole. I mean, this one's only been open less than a day. Boss said, get her done. He wants it clean before those guys get here. They need to check for hull damage. Let's get to work. Steve walked closer to the manhole. He descended the metal ladder first. I tied the line onto the buckets and shovels and carefully lowered them down into the barge. Then it was my turn to climb down. I lowered myself into the manhole, swung my foot to one of the ladder rungs, and then reached out and grabbed a handhold. The bright light of the Arctic day dimmed as I made my way down into the darkness of the barge. We began a cycle of shoveling rust and silt into piles, then loading it into the buckets and taking turns pulling the muck to the top deck. As the morning progressed, our topic of discussion ran from the gamut of girlfriends, skiing, college parties, past girlfriends, and just about anything that kept our minds off where we were and what we were doing. Deep into another 12-hour workday, I pulled out my pocket watch, checked the time. 15 minutes till lunch. I'm gonna go by our room, then I'll meet you at the boat. Sounds good. I kept shoveling as Steve ascended the ladder. The sound of footsteps echoed for a few seconds as he made his way across the top deck. I picked up one of the buckets, turned it upside down, then sat down, enjoying one last chew of tobacco before lunch. I stared into the darkness of the hull, the lack of light and sound. The totality of the void felt as though it was something tangible, as if it had its own indeterminate weight and mass. I felt like I could reach out and touch it, hold on to the complete nothingness and feel the complexity of everything it lacked. Somewhere in that void, there was indeed something. I called into the black steel entombment, "Hello!" Complete silence. Had I heard my own voice? Shit, I mumbled and stood up. This is way too fucking early in the season to let my mind spiral off. I climbed the ladder out of the belly of the barge, squinting as I crawled out of the manhole. A deep breath of frigid air and the moan of the camp generator helped ground my consciousness. I made my way to the bow of the barge. The expanse of frozen sea stretched to the shoreline in the same shade of gray as the sky above. I thought about putting together a warm lunch in the galley as I leapt toward the snowdrift with a packed trail to our boat. My foot fell short of the lip. I attempted to reach out with both hands. Too late. I was already hurtling down into the chasm between the ice and the barge. My downward progress stopped abruptly at the bottom, where the ice and steel of the hull and barge met. The snowdrift, having formed against the bow, but now separated by several feet, arced downward like the bottom of a large bowl, mirroring the curvature of the bow. I reached down and I felt my legs, my ankles and feet. There's no need to panic, nothing broken. I assessed the situation. Stuck between a layer of ice, compressed against an island on one side, and wedged against a 200-foot-long barge on the other. The bottom of the crevice was only about a half-foot wide, where my boots were bent, toes up. The barge could pop free of the ice at any minute, shift, and crush me in a split second. They say your life flashes before your eyes near the moment of death, but I'm not sure that's completely true. I didn't think of how I would never see my friends or loved ones again. Childhood memories did not pass by like film highlights. I'll bet that given time to think it over, the same thing went through the minds of most people faced with the possibility of their demise, as was going through mine at that moment. I need to get the hell out of here as fast as possible. No time for life reruns. My boots slid against the ice with each step I attempted. Zero traction. I could feel the cold steel against my back. My breath quickened and puffs of steam spiraled from my mouth and nose. My heart pounded against the can of chewing tobacco in my top coverall pocket. I yelled out a few times, but I knew Steve was back in his room getting high or had already made his way to lunch. My voice sounded frantic and flat in the confines of that compacted space, like a babbling car sales commercial on a mono radio. Fuck! Tried to turn my body, it wedged in tighter. A dangerous situation was quickly getting worse. I had never experienced claustrophobia, but I had also never found myself pinned between a barge and a wall of ice before, either. I jerked my shoulders back and forth and could finally spin my body around. Deep breath. My back was now to the ice and my boots against the bow. My biggest fear was slipping farther down into the narrowing gap between the ice and barge and becoming permanently stuck. I did not want to be found that way. I also realized I was exerting too much strength in my struggle to claw my way out. A calmer, more concentrated effort would probably yield better results. Pushing against the bow of the barge with both hands and feet in equal pressure and pressing my back against the frozen wall, I slowly slid my way up the surface of the curved ice. I thought about how fast I slid down compared to how slow I was inching my way upward. Gravity's a bitch! On a slippery slope of metal and ice. Approaching the top, I made my move. Pushing as hard as I could with both feet, I crested the lip of the frozen drift and spun around on my stomach. Did the Inupiat have a word for being crushed by steel and ice? I rested for a few minutes until my cheek became numb from lying on the drift, and I lifted my head. Someone once told me, dreams are merely random fragments of our imagination. Just nonsensical thoughts, meaning absolutely nothing. They say it's a frivolous endeavor to try to put any value in their worth or to attempt to decipher what they might mean. They represent nothing more than quirky images left over from various thoughts bouncing around in our head. I'm not exactly sure how dreams develop, but I don't dismiss them as meaningless. Maybe it's because so many seem to evolve out of metaphor, and some are easier to understand than others. A recurring dream of mine remains wedged between images born in deep sleep and those of distant memories. Sometimes it's difficult to comprehend as a product of my imagination or a distortion of the past. I find myself on the island with a crew member. We're making our way back to the boat, to the Prud'hoe. The fog is dense, and all I can see is the shadowy figure of my crew member in the mist. Occasionally I see his face and the mist coating his round, wire-rimmed glasses. I can tell by his expression he's perplexed, and he's struggling to walk through the mist and see through the mist. Same as I. We're walking in the same direction. We pass abandoned whaling boats, and in the distance, they take the shape of beached whales. Visibility becomes even more limited and dwindles down to less than 5 to 10 feet in all directions. We keep traveling over the tundra's irregular terrain, sometimes stumbling, often cursing. I realize we've recently left the Dew Line bar after drinking a few scotch and waters. In the distance, the Prud'hoe awaits. We can't see it, yet we know it's there. We'll board her, fire up the engines, turn on the running lights, and sail out to sea